The afternoon sun hung low over the California highway, turning the asphalt into a ribbon of heat and glare. Traffic slowed near an exit ramp where a black motorcycle lay on its side, chrome scraped and smoking faintly. A man in a torn leather jacket was sprawled a few feet away. The familiar winged skull patch on his back marked him instantly, a Hell's Angel. People knew the name, people knew the stories, and because of that, no one stepped too close. A small crowd gathered at a careful distance. Some drivers rolled down their windows, staring with wide eyes before pulling out their phones. Others whispered, unsure whether to feel fear or curiosity. The man on the ground barely moved. His breaths were shallow, uneven, as if each one required a decision. Blood darkened the pavement beneath him, and his hand twitched once before falling still. "Someone call 911, a voice said, but no one answered. Someone else muttered that help was probably already on the way. The truth was simpler, and colder. Everyone was waiting for someone else to act. Then she arrived. She wasn't loud or dramatic. She parked her old sedan on the shoulder and stepped out, drawn by the uneasy stillness in the air. She took in the scene in seconds. The bike, the crowd, the man who looked like he didn't belong to anyone's idea of mercy. Her heart pounded. She had never dealt with anything like this. She had places to be, a life that depended on staying out of trouble. For a moment, she hesitated. But then she saw his face. The tough image didn't matter anymore. Without the helmet, he looked older than she expected, lines carved deep by years of sun and hard roads. His eyes fluttered, unfocused, searching the sky as if trying to remember how he'd ended up there. Something in that look, confused, human, afraid, cut through her doubt. She pushed past the onlookers. A few people shifted uncomfortably, surprised that someone so small was getting so close. Kneeling beside him, she spoke softly, introducing herself even though she didn't know why. Maybe it was to remind him he wasn't alone. Maybe it was to remind herself she was really doing this. "Stay with me," she said, keeping her voice steady even as her hands shook. She didn't have medical training, but she had common sense. She checked his breathing, careful not to move him too much. When she saw where the blood was coming from, she pulled off her scarf and pressed it firmly against the wound. The red soaked through almost instantly. Panic flared in her chest, but she forced it down. Panic wouldn't help him. Around them, the crowd stayed silent. A few people looked away. Others watched with something close to guilt. The man groaned, his eyes opening just enough to meet hers. There was surprise there, maybe even disbelief, that someone was helping him. "You're going to be okay," she said, not knowing if it was true but knowing he needed to hear it. In the distance, sirens finally began to rise. She stayed where she was, holding pressure, talking to him, refusing to let go. On that highway, surrounded by strangers, she made a quiet choice, to risk everything for a man everyone else had already counted out. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the thick silence that had settled over the highway. Red and blue lights flashed against windshields, finally pulling the crowd back into motion. Paramedics jumped from the ambulance, their movements fast and practiced. One of them knelt beside the injured biker, asking quick questions, checking his pulse, his breathing. Another looked up at the woman holding the blood-soaked scarf. "Don't move," the paramedic said gently, placing gloved hands over hers. "You did good. Keep pressure just like that." Only then did she realize how badly her arms ached, how stiff her fingers had become. She nodded, swallowing hard. Adrenaline had kept her steady, but now reality crept in. This was a Hell's Angel. This was dangerous. This was none of her business. And yet, she stayed. They carefully transferred the man onto a stretcher. As they lifted him, his eyes opened again. This time, he was more aware. He turned his head slightly, searching, until he found her. His gaze locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, the noise of the highway faded away. "Didn't run," he murmured, his voice rough. She leaned closer so only he could hear. "No," she said softly. "I didn't." They loaded him into the ambulance, doors slamming shut with finality. As it pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, the moment already turning into a story people would tell later, if they told it at all. She stood there, suddenly unsure of what to do with herself. Her scarf was gone. Her hands were stained red. Her legs trembled now that she no longer had to be strong. A highway patrol officer approached, asking a few questions, taking her statement. She answered calmly, leaving out how scared she'd been, how close she'd come to walking away like everyone else. When the officer thanked her, she felt embarrassed, as if she hadn't done anything special. Days passed. Life tried to return to normal, but the memory followed her. Every time she drove that stretch of road, she wondered if the man had survived. She never searched the news. Part of her was afraid of the answer. In a hospital miles away, the Hell's Angel woke to the steady beep of monitors. His body ached, but he was alive. Doctors told him another few minutes on the road might have changed everything. He listened quietly, then asked only one question. Who helped me? They told him a woman had stopped. A stranger. No name, no badge, no connection. Just someone who refused to look away. When word reached his brothers, the story traveled fast. Not about the crash, but about the woman who knelt beside one of their own when no one else would. In a world where respect was earned through strength and fear, this was something different. Back on the road, healed but changed, he carried that memory with him. He never found her, but every time he passed an accident, every time he saw someone hesitate, he remembered the quiet courage of a stranger. And sometimes, he stopped. Weeks later, the motorcycle roared back onto the open road, its engine steady, its rider slower but wiser. The scars beneath the leather jacket were still fresh, a reminder of how close the line between life and death truly was. The Hell's Angel rode through Arizona, then Nevada, the endless highways stretching out like questions with no clear answers. The brothers noticed the change before he ever spoke about it. He rode differently now. He watched more. He stopped more. At a gas station outside Flagstaff, he saw it again. A small crowd gathered, a car pulled over, a man slumped against the door, breathing hard. Familiar scene. Familiar hesitation. People glanced, whispered, waited. The biker cut his engine and stepped off without thinking. "Hey," he said, voice calm but firm. "Give him some space." The crowd parted. He knelt down, just like she had. Checked the man's breathing. Called for help. Stayed. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedic gave him a look of surprise, then a nod of respect. The biker walked away before anyone could thank him. Word spread quietly within the club. Not in speeches or rules, but in actions. Riders started carrying first aid kits. They stopped calling people bystanders, and started calling them neighbors. No patches changed. No reputations were erased. But something shifted. As for her, she never knew any of this. She replaced the scarf. Life moved forward. Work, traffic, ordinary days. Sometimes she wondered if she'd done the right thing. Sometimes she remembered the blood and the fear and felt her chest tighten. But other times, she remembered his eyes, the way he'd realized someone cared. That memory stayed warm, even when the world felt cold. One afternoon, months later, she broke down on a quiet road outside Los Angeles. Engine trouble, no signal, heat pressing down. She sat in her car, frustrated and tired, when the sound of a motorcycle approached and slowed. Her heart skipped. The bike pulled over at a safe distance. The rider removed his helmet. Leather jacket, patched back. For a second, fear crept in, until he spoke. "Car trouble?" he asked. She nodded. He checked the engine, flagged down a tow truck, and waited with her until it arrived. They talked about nothing important. The weather, the road, how unreliable old cars could be. He never mentioned the accident. Never asked her name. When the tow truck came, he gave a small nod and turned back to his bike. Before he rode off, he said one last thing. "Thanks for stopping when people need it. World needs more of that." She watched him disappear down the road, a strange feeling settling in her chest. She never realized she'd just met the man she once saved. And he never told her she had saved his life. But maybe that was the point. Because courage doesn't always need recognition. Sometimes, it just needs to keep moving forward. One choice, the years that followed didn't turn dramatic or loud. They turned meaningful. The Hell's Angel kept riding, but his routes changed. He chose roads that passed through towns instead of cutting around them. He stopped at diners instead of drive-throughs. People noticed that he listened more than he spoke. When someone asked why he bothered with community rides or safety events, he only shrugged and said, "Road gives. Road takes. We give back." Within the club, his influence settled deep. New riders learned early that strength wasn't just speed or muscle, it was judgment. It was knowing when to slow down. When an accident happened outside Reno one winter night, 3 bikes stopped without hesitation. Traffic was controlled, emergency services were called, lives were saved. No headlines followed, but that didn't matter anymore. He remembered the highway in California less as a place of pain and more as a turning point. A reminder that reputation disappears fast when you're lying on cold pavement, and that humanity doesn't. As for her, she finished her training and became a certified emergency response volunteer. She never chased recognition. She worked quietly, helping at roadside incidents, assisting at community events, teaching basic first aid to teens and seniors. Sometimes people asked what made her start. She always gave the same answer. Someone once needed help, she'd say. And I was there. One evening, after a long volunteer shift, she stopped at a small desert cafe just off the highway. The place smelled like coffee and dust, and the walls were lined with old road signs. She sat alone, sipping slowly, enjoying the silence. A familiar motorcycle sound pulled into the lot. She didn't look up right away. She didn't need to. He came in, helmet under his arm. No surprise this time. Just a small smile that carried years of unspoken understanding. He ordered coffee and took a seat a few tables away, not too close, not too far. They talked, not about the accident, not about saving lives. They talked about roads, about weather, about how the desert changed at sunset. It felt easy, human, normal. Before leaving, he stood and nodded toward her volunteer jacket. "You kept going," he said. She nodded back. "So did you." Outside, engines started, doors closed, life moved on. They didn't exchange numbers. They didn't make plans. They didn't need to. Some connections aren't meant to last forever, they're meant to start something. As he rode away, the road stretched ahead like it always had. Dangerous, beautiful, unpredictable, but no longer lonely. And as she drove home, she felt the same quiet certainty she'd felt years ago on that highway. The certainty that when the moment comes, when fear tells you to look away, you don't have to listen. Because courage isn't loud, it doesn't wear patches or uniforms. Sometimes, it's just the decision to stop. Sometimes, that decision changes everything. One road, one brave moment at a time.